Hello and welcome to SawJester Reads Final Draft, the Ultimatiest story. Let us begin. It was a bright and sunny day. The sun illuminated the yellow grass and crackled sidewalks in front of houses. There were a few people walking on the sidewalks on both sides of the street. Then a blue light came down from above, striking the sidewalk and sending a ton of small pieces of concrete into the street. When the smoke from the impact cleared, a blue doll-like object with 3 eyes that looked glued on stood there. It walks towards the door of the house closest to it. It knocks on the door, and after a few seconds, someone answered the door. The person who answered the door looked like they hadn't slept in 30 years. The blue thing produced audio. You are the chosen one, and because you are the chosen one, you are required to deal with all the following problems. Some teenagers are loitering outside of a store. The Antichrist showed up at some point. The global temperature is rising. The Imperial Parliament is passing some unfair laws. Someone is trying to overthrow the somewhat fair Imperial government. There has also been an increase in deaths related to paper. Several people have disappeared around a large abandoned building. And finally, some people have been saying color instead of color. The person standing in the door goes back inside and slams the door in front of the blue thing. A small crowd of people had gathered around to witness what was happening. The blue thing turns to the crowd and points at someone randomly. The blue thing produced sound vibrations. You are now the chosen one. The blue thing was pointing at James, LastNamePending, a college student with nothing better to do than waste time walking around. He was wearing a red jacket and black pants. James, LastNamePending, responded, I am. The blue thing produced a response. Yes, and I'm assuming you overheard the problems you are required to solve. James, LastNamePending, replied, I did, but I didn't. The blue thing interrupted with produced audio. Perfect, let us begin. The blue thing, in motion that could be described as walking, moved over to James, LastNamePending, and performed a grabbing motion on James' arm. James asked, First, what and who are you? The blue thing produced a reply. I am a grand solver. So I exist to solve the most important problems. As for who, I don't have a name, but you can call me the grand solver. Stares into the sky, deep in thought. Recycling bin. James' LastNamePending replies, slightly confused. Alright. Recycling bin. Recycling bin produced more audio. Now we truly begin. First, you will need tools for the tasks. The plotted armor and a sword. I buried them in a field somewhere around here. James, LastNamePending, you mean plated armor? And does either of those things help solve any of these problems? The recycling bin produces more audio. No and yes. Now let us proceed. Recycling bin starts walking in the direction and motions for James to follow. James thinks about his life decisions for a few seconds and then decides to follow recycling bin. They walk along the broken sidewalk for a bit until recycling bin spots the Antichrist walking on the other side of the street. The Antichrist had dark red skin, 2 sets with glaring eyes and two medium-sized horns. It was wearing a crown with an upside-down cross on it and a business suit. Recycling bin produces quiet audio towards Dream. That's the Antichrist. Go kill them. James replied, don't you think that seems a tad bit rash? The recycling bin produced audio in response. No. Recycling bin pointed at the Antichrist and produced loud audio towards them. Hey, Antichrist, prepare to die. The Antichrist turns towards the two of them with a look of disappointment on their face. He walked over to them. The Antichrist. You're going to kill someone who has done nothing wrong. Recycling bin produced audio. You're the Antichrist. You've done lots of things wrong. The Antichrist replied, the only thing I've done was get fired from my job as a geometry teacher because some woman said I was corrupting the youth, a statement that is completely false and based on a 2,000-year-old book written by people who burned people alive for looking different. Recycling bin produced audio. You're the opposite version of Jesus Christ, so you can't really be good. The Antichrist replied, that is under the false assumption that Jesus Christ was good. Let me ask, is someone who starts a cult that suppresses minorities, promotes male supremacy, and supports violent conquests and pillaging across the world really that good? Recycling bin produced audio. The Antichrist was stated to be the great deceiver, so your statements don't hold a lot of truth in them. The Antichrist replied, they showed their dedication to the truth when they put Copernicus under house arrest for proving that the Earth orbited the Sun. The ripple effects of all their lies can still be seen today, with the continued mistreatment of minorities, the pay gap between men and women, and people denying things with tons of logical and factual evidence because it contradicts what a 2,000-year-old book said. James stated, the Antichrist doesn't seem to be doing anything objectively wrong, so let's leave them to do their thing and move on. Recycling bin. Recycling bin produced audio. Fine, but don't call me Recycling bin. Call me Dr. Solver instead. Dr. Solver and James leave the Antichrist and walk away. Then a meteor hit the planet and everyone died at the end. But suddenly the meteor got retconned and you realize you release tears of joy knowing that you get to read more of this literary masterpiece. Dr. Solver produced audio. Well, since you failed on killing the Antichrist, we'll have to solve one of the other problems on the list. James replied, yes, that's what I figured. They continued until they reached a large open field with dark green grass. Dr. Solver stopped at a section of the field. Dr. Solver created audio. This is where I buried those things I mentioned a few pages ago. So start. Dr. Solver dug up a clear shirt and handed it in the handle. Dr. Solver handed the items to James. James said, thanks, and places the clear shirt over his red jacket. Dr. Solver produced audio. The sword broke, but the handle was probably good enough. James said, Sure, so where's the next problem? Dr. Solver produces audio. Yes, the next problem is the people trying to overthrow the somewhat unfair imperial government. James replied, do you know the motive, or is there another problem you're just assuming is a problem? Dr. Solver produced sound. Their motive is pretty simple. Around 312 years ago, the British Empire discovered a powerful resource known as Georginium, named after the reigning monarch at the time. The resource was exclusively found on the continent of Australia. The natives were using it to power all sorts of machines. But when the British ship headed by James Cook ended up on the coast of Cape York Peninsula, the natives all got smallpox and died, leaving the technology and Georginium in British hands. The British quickly found out how to weaponize the Georginium, which allowed for the creation of weapons more powerful than the world had ever seen. Now at this time there were other countries that weren't the British Empire. These other countries formed a coalition in the year 1807, headed by Napoleon Bonaparte, to fight the British. However, the British, armed with Georginium weapons, defeated this coalition and begun to slowly incorporate those countries into the empire. The rebels want to return the world back to its fractured state. James, LastNamePending, not to be confused with James Cook, responded, that doesn't sound like the best reason for a revolution, but it's not completely unjustifiable reason, so I'll see who's in charge of it and make my judgment. James, LastNamePending, and Dr. Solver walked to the place Dr. Solver said the rebels would be at. A moderate-sized group of people was gathered next to a few trees that would probably be considered a forest due to the lack of forests in the current era. As Dr. Solver and James, LastNamePending, got closer to the crowd, they heard an imposing voice with a heavy mainland European accent. The voice speaks. For centuries, we have lived under British occupation. Our cultures have been suppressed. Our families have been butchered. Our God has been forsaken. We must rise up against British oppression and drive them from our lands. I, Parcel Hagman, have humbly accepted the burden of leading this noble crusade for justice and morality. Dr. Solver created audio. Parcel Hangman, and everyone here all have at least 78% British ancestry, so the reasons they make no sense. If you kill Parcel Hangman, the rest will likely give up. James, LastNamePending, looked at Parcel Hangman. Parcel Hangman was wearing a black robe and a white mitre with golden markings on it, and a side-to-side bicorn hat on the top of the mitre. Parcel Hangman was also carrying a school-appropriate projectile-based weapon, so he was armed. James, LastNamePending, couldn't decide on whether to just leave or go interact with the lunatic dressed up as a priest and Napoleon at the same time. So it was decided that you, reader of this fine literary masterpiece, would decide what happens next. If James' LastNamePending should interact with Parcel Hangman, go to section Interact. Go to the section labeled Interact. If James' LastNamePending should just leave, continue reading here. We will start with the continue reading here option. Dr. Solver produced audio. I don't think you're chosen one material anymore because your body count is still 0. Oh no, I missed one. James said, I'm going to interact with that guy. What's the next problem? Very noticeable typo. Dr. Silver produced sound. I don't think you're chosen one material anymore because your body count is still 0. You can't solve any problems with a body count of 0, so you're fired. Also, don't call me Dr. Solver. Call me a lone table floating on an ocean of broken syringes instead. James said sarcastically, okay, I am deeply saddened by this. James' LastNamePending walks away, but in the direction that came from. A lone table floating on an ocean of broken syringes walks towards the crowd of people. Parcel Hangman spots it and approaches. Parcel Hangman said, who are you, and why are you here? A lone table floating on an ocean of broken syringes produced audio. I'm a lone table floating on a broken of syringes, and I'm gonna kill you. Parcel Hangman cringes a little and then aims his school-appropriate projectile-based weapon at a lone table on an ocean of broken syringes and fires 3 times. All 3 of the school-appropriate projectiles hit a lone table floating on an ocean of broken syringes in its chest. A lone table floating on an ocean of broken syringes produces audio. Ow. And walks away from Parcel Hangman. James' LastNamePending would go on to finish college and fail to find a job that uses his degree anywhere, and he would end up working at a minimum wage job, living paycheck to paycheck until he died. A lone table floating on an ocean of broken syringes changed its name to Raggy and found a new chosen one to help it in executing the final solution to the teenage question. The Antichrist would go on to prove with 101% accuracy that religion was false, corrupt, and unfair, but everyone still denied it. Parcel Hangman would go on to start a revolt that would become known as the 32-Second War. The revolt would cause the British government to ban freedom of thought by placing microchips in every citizen's brain to keep track of their thoughts. The end. Stop reading. If only. Now we will do the alternate path, where James' LastNamePending chooses to interact. Parcel Hangman asked, who are you and why are you here? Dr. Solver produced audio. That is the chosen one, and I'm Dr. Solver, and the chosen one is gonna kill you. Parcel Hangman said, okay then, and aimed his school-appropriate projectile weapon at James's chest, and fired it 3 times. The school-appropriate projectiles bounced off the plotted armor. The first school-appropriate projectile went through space and time, hitting some unsuspecting character in a future screenplay. The second school-appropriate projectile hit Parcel Hangman in the head, killing him instantly. The third school-appropriate projectile hit the sun, killing it instantly, causing it to explode, taking out the entire solar system with it. But it did technically solve global warming and all the other problems, so Dr. Sulfur was satisfied. With the capital planet of the British Empire destroyed, along with the imperial parliament and monarchy, the British East India Company too in space seized power as the new imperial government. But without Earth as the central trading hub, many planets started to declare independence from the British Empire. This would be a loss the British Empire would never recover from until they discovered Georginium-2 and used its power to conquer all of everything, everywhere, everywhen. The end. Stop reading. That concludes Final Draft, the Ultimatiest story. It kinda sucked. That concludes. That's everything I have to say. May your day be at least mediocre.